On today's Comfort Kills episode, our guest went through unimaginable trauma as a child. Having lived through sexual abuse and abandonment as a child, Terri Kozlowski is here today to share how she learned to transcend the fear that the egoic mind keeps bringing to the forefront. Terri is a proud Native American warrior who is rediscovering her true path in life, one of joy and love. She is now a successful soul and life coach whose mission is to inspire others to master their fear. She is sharing her story with the world in the form of her book writing, Transcending Fear, a memoir about overcoming sexual abuse, abandonment, and discovering your authentic self. Hi, Terri. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Jasmine?
Thank you. I'm great. I am so excited to have you here today because when I met you during our meet and greet, just the story that you shared and the past that you've had and the resilience that you've overcome and just overcoming the past just has been absolutely amazing. And hearing the story and having it like in the background of my mind and now wanting to know more about you, I'm excited to have you here so that I can really truly get to meet you more than our 15-minute meet and greet. So happy to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So Terri, why don't we go ahead and we'll just get started with the beginning of your story. Who was Terri as a young girl and what occurred?
I was a very vibrant child. I was always connected to spirit. I knew I was here for a purpose. And according to my dad, I could speak volumes with my eyes. And one of the things that occurred when I was little was I was very much at the forefront of whatever it was that was going on. Yeah. And then my parents divorced and my dad got custody of my sister and I. He was the first man in the state of Maryland to get custody of two small girls. This was in the early 70s. Yeah. And at that point, moms always got to get the kids. And it ended up being that my mother actually didn't show up for the hearing. So that's why he got custody. And my mother always said to me that she gave us up. And in her mind, that's what she did. Right. So they divorced and we ended up moving to Pennsylvania with my grandparents. And we hadn't seen my mother for a couple of years. I was 8 when the divorce was final. When I was 11, we went to visit her. At that point, she was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we traveled across the country. My little sister and I, she's 11 months younger than I am. Right. And we got there and everything was fabulous for 2 weeks. Okay. And then she started drinking. And when my mother drinks, 2 things happen. She gets very angry and she's one of the meanest drunks I've ever met. Oh my God. Very, very nasty because she internalizes things and then explodes outward. So she started drinking and having parties, and it ended up being that my codependent behavior kicked in. Even at 11, I was codependent. Wow. Pouring drinks for her and her guests, dumping them out. When they all passed out, covering them up with blankets, making sure that they were comfortable, cleaning up after them because drunks don't clean up after themselves. And I had a little sister with me who I needed to take care of. So part of that was all that codependent behavior. We were there 4 weeks when she had a party. And at that point, what we didn't know before we got there was that she was also a drug addict. And so she's now taking drugs. And my sister is asleep and somebody drugs her. And I actually don't know it at the time that that's what happened, but she won't wake up. I can't wake her up. Yeah. And I end up going to bed that night. And I'm locking doors so people can't get into the bedroom, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I wake up with a gag in my mouth and my hands and feet bound. And 3 men raped me. Oh my God. So that my mother could have drugs. My mother stood in the corner of the room watching. No. Then she and everybody else disappeared. Wow. And we were alone for 4 days. 4 days. 4 days. Wow. My sister slept for 3 of them.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm monitoring, I'm putting my little head against her chest, listening to her breathe, watching, making sure her heart's beating. And she just seems to be in a very deep sleep.
Mm-hmm.
She wakes up and is very hungry, and I'm taking care of her. And she's asking me where my mother is. And I told her I don't know. And that I thought maybe we needed to call Daddy. It was time. We needed to go home.
Right.
She was all upset, didn't want to do that. My mother shows up later that day. Yeah. And we had a little routine where she would come home on Fridays with her paycheck and give it to me. I'm 11. And I would go to the grocery store and cash the check, get a money order for the rent. She lived in a little weekly efficiency apartment and buy groceries.
Oh my goodness.
And Tammy and I went back to the house or the apartment and gave her the groceries and went to pay the rent. And we came back across the parking lot. She had our suitcases sitting out on the front stoop and said it was time for us to go, went back inside and locked the door.
Oh no. With no plans, no tickets, no follow on to that. Just that's it. Oh wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Complete and utter abandonment on not a good part of town of Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Right, because Albuquerque's got some questionable areas.
Yeah.
Sure.
And this was in the early 80s. So my sister's screaming and crying, and a tape clicks on in my head. The last thing my dad said to me before we went to New Mexico was to take care of your baby sister. And that tape clicked on.
Yeah.
So part of that tape was a very beneficial thing for me to get me focused into, okay, what do we have to do?
Right.
What can I do? I calmed her down. We made a decision to go to one of my mother's friends' houses that was a mile away. Yeah. So my sister and I are carrying suitcases through the streets of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and nobody stops us, asks us a question. It's not a strange sight, obviously, for two little girls to be walking down the street with suitcases.
Yeah.
So we get there, I call my dad and tell him that we need to come home. I don't think I told him she was drinking. I don't think I told him she threw us out. I just said, we have to go. We have to come home now.
Yeah.
We were on the plane the next day, back to Pennsylvania.
Right.
And I get to my dad. We get off the plane. I go up to my dad and I tell him, I don't hug him. All I say is, we need to go to therapy.
Oh.
So there was an awareness somewhere deep inside me that something bad happened, something I didn't understand. It wasn't my fault, but this was something that I could not deal with.
Right.
I was in therapy for 5 years. Now, therapy for sexual trauma in the early 80s was pretty much non-existent. I was never actually asked by I went to a counselor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist through all of this. None of them ever asked me if I was sexually abused.
Oh, wow. Wow. So you go home, you see your dad, you say, I need to see a therapist. And that's all it was. He sent you to a therapist with really no rhyme or reason other than a request, a very just blanket request that you needed to see one. Oh my goodness.
And it was like 3 days after we landed. I was in a counselor's office. Yeah. And part of all of that was he knew something bad had happened for me to call and say, we need to come home now. But he also didn't probe. Right. And, my sister told him that she was drinking and all of that. So he understood that part of it. But it was a year before I told my dad about the sexual abuse.
Oh my goodness.
And it never came up during therapy. And I'm assuming my dad would have told the therapist that this had occurred.
Yeah.
So I went through all this therapy that wasn't necessarily what I needed to actually deal with the trauma, because I'm 11 or 12, 13, 14, 15, whatever age. And I don't know how to say I was sexually abused. I don't know what happened. I don't have the language for it. So, and nowadays they have the dolls and they have other ways of talking about it that, inappropriate touches, all of it, but that didn't really exist when I was in therapy. So I didn't have that luxury. So I get to college And I have a college friend tell me that I liked being a victim.
Well, that's mean.
That's the reaction I had. And interestingly, I got very angry, of course. Right. I got very angry. Yes,
rightfully so.
But then I sat with it because something in me said, you know what? Maybe there's something to this. Let me think about this. So I thought about it I sat with it for a while. And what I realized was I was getting something out of it. When you identify as a victim of any kind of trauma, and you tell your story as a victim, people treat you completely different than they would if they didn't know you were a victim.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Or how you tell them your story will depend on how they react to you.
Right.
So if you are coming from a victim mentality, then it's all about the trauma. It's all about them and all the stuff they did to you. And what I was getting out of it was I was being left alone. And I was okay being left alone. And when you're left alone and you're not being asked to be responsible for things, you are not asked to be participating in things. So anything I did was okay because as long as I was acting the part,
right,
then they left me alone. Everybody left me alone. So my family left me alone. I didn't have a lot of friends, and those I did have left me alone. So at that point, I had a major shift in mindset, and I went from being a victim to becoming a survivor. And part of that transference was taking responsibility for all my choices moving forward. Up until that moment where I became a survivor, I could blame all the choices I made on what happened to me.
Right. Yeah.
I could blame my mother for everything. All the bad choices I made, I can point directly back to her. But the moment I became a survivor, it empowered me to take control of the course of my life, where yes, the past could still influence me because the past there were triggers I needed to overcome. But for the most part, when I decided to become a survivor and retake the power for the decisions that I was making and say, you know what? Yes, you triggered me. Yes, I reacted poorly, but that's on me. That's not on anybody else.
Oh, wow.
So that was the first major hurdle that I got over in dealing with the past.
Wow. So Terri, I hate to take this back a few steps, but just, thank you so much for sharing your story and for showing your vulnerability and just putting this out there to the world. It's very brave. And I think that there will be so many people who will hear the story and there's some type of situation in their life, whether it's recent or decades ago, that they can sit back and say, so that they too have endured something like this. And, I just can't even fathom being a mother to trade your child as a cost to your next high. And that to me, it baffles me. And I'm terribly sorry that you or anybody in that type of situation should ever have to endure that at that age or at any age.
Correct.
But you get back to Pennsylvania, back on the East Coast, your dad's fast. He's a fast acting guy. I can, from getting you on the plane back home, getting you into a therapist, I appreciate that he was so just understanding that, okay, if my daughter's telling me this needs to happen, I'm making it happen. And he doesn't question it. He doesn't probe. It's very uncharacteristic of many men. So I think it's a really good thing that he was just on top of it. And I think that really, I'm not sure how you feel about it, but I think that probably really helps some of your resilience as well. Just knowing that, if dad can act quickly on something, then I can also too inherit that as my own characteristic and trait. But not knowing for a year until after you've returned, how did that conversation come about? What happened? How did he react? I mean, and then even, and your sister, did she realize what had happened or what could have happened to her while she was basically unconscious for 3 days?
I did tell her sooner than I told my dad about the rape. That part of the reason I told him is because she got mad at me and decided that she was going to tell everybody. So there was that sibling rivalry thing. I don't know if she did not realize she was drugged, number one.
Okay.
Until right before in the midst of writing this book, I had a conversation with her about, everything that happened, because I wanted to make sure that I told her before she read it in the book. And there was lots of things that I didn't tell her then. I didn't tell her she was drugged, because why does she need to know that?
Yeah.
She was 10. She was 10.
Yeah.
So as I got older, and when I was writing the book, I had this conversation with her, and she said, "So I just slept?" I said, "Yeah, you just slept." And she said, "But you were always with me." I said, "Yes, I was always with you." And she and I were inseparable as children.
Yeah.
Up until this particular trauma, we had spent every single day, except for 3 months during my parents' divorce. She went to live with my mother. And except for that, we were always together. And I was always taking care of her. And there are pictures of the two of us where she's looking up at me with such adoration. And she said, she says to me, "You're so wise." She's been telling me that since I was little, how wise I am. And for her, it's that relationship was very important when we were younger. So I had this conversation with my dad. We're sitting out on the front porch, and I'm swinging because movement calms me. And I'm not really looking at him, because I'm just kind of telling him kind of what happened, that, these 3 guys raped me. They, I don't really know who they are. If I saw their faces, I could tell you that's one of them, but I didn't know their names. These were her friends that she was partying with.
Yeah.
She may not have ever seen some of them again.
Yeah.
I do know one of them was an ex-husband of a friend of hers. So that's the only thing that I knew. And he asked me, "What do you want me to do?"
Oh, wow.
And I said, "I don't understand the question." Now I am now 12, going on 13. I didn't understand what he meant. He said, "Do you want to press charges? Do you want it go?" And I'm no, because I was in junior high. I understood what rape was, because now I'm in the library looking things up, and I understand that it is not something easily prosecuted.
Right.
So, and again, I'm under the age of 13, and yet I had this knowing that this wasn't a path I should go down.
Wow.
And on top of that, the venue technically would have been in New Mexico. I didn't want to go back to New Mexico.
Right.
I didn't want to go back there. So
wow.
I said, no, there really isn't anything to do. I had no physical issues. So that it was just all this angst, internal angst that, as far as he was concerned, the therapist was taking care of.
Okay. Wow. And that's it. We move on. We move on with life. Wow. So you get to college, you're called a victim. You start thinking, okay, I'll embrace this idea because it works. Everybody's leaving me alone. And then you become a survivor and you shift your mindset. So at what point did you realize that victimhood was not where you wanted to live anymore?
If you're a victim, when you're a victim, you are powerless. There is no power in your victimhood, because you can't change because you're blaming. You can't move forward because you're judging. You can't do anything towards the future. You can't set goals. You can't have dreams because you're all tied up in the past.
Yeah.
So I was depressed. And one of the reasons we went to I graduated from a psychotherapist to a psychologist. No. So the person with the PhD was the psychiatrist, was because he wanted to put me on drugs. The psychiatrist wanted to drug me. My dad was thankful that he did not allow that to occur. I was functioning. I wasn't happy. I wasn't, I was getting A's and B's in school. And so there was that part of things was still moving forward. It's just that I was depressed. I was sad. And because when you live in the past, that's where depression sets in, because that's where you're focusing on. The past causes depression. And when you're anxious, which is worrying about the future, you're living in the future. So I did a 180. By the time I was 18, I was having full-blown anxiety attacks.
Yeah.
I would hold my breath when I started feeling, when I'd hold my breath till I passed out to stop the anxiety attack from occurring.
Gosh. Wow.
So after the second time, I ended up in the emergency room and they said it was a panic attack. And I'm like, this isn't working. This isn't working. There has to be something else. I did the depression thing. I did the anxiety thing. I'm carrying around Xanax now. And this isn't working for me. There, obviously what I think is helping isn't helping. And so I started down a different path. And the different path I started down was trying to retell my story. When you tell your story from a victimhood, you end up not having power. And when you start retelling your story and being choosy with who you tell your story with, being choosy in what details you share, because not everybody needs to know everything. And a lot of people think that if you're going to tell your story, you tell all of it. No, you tell what you're comfortable telling, and you tell those things that for you empower you. Because the more you tell that story of empowerment, the better you feel and the stronger you become and the more self-confident you become. Instead of being the victim, you become that strong survivor.
Wow. So Terri, before we go any farther into this, why don't we just tell everybody what your background is? And because I really feel like, I don't know, I feel like deep inside, like your background really makes you who you are. You're so wise beyond your years, from the age of 11 to where you are now. I just feel like everything, when you were 18 and you realized you had to change it, like you've been here and here and here and it's not working, so let's change it. And just tell us what your background is.
I was a stay-at-home mom till my son turned 14. He is now 29. And I went back into the workforce and went from being a floater to now I'm vice president of operations for the company of a small medical device company. But during the course of becoming pregnant with the book, because if you'd have asked me back in 2015 or 2017, was I ever going to write my story? The answer was no, I wasn't writing my story. Summer of 2018, I got pregnant with the book. And I sat down, and for 9 months, it poured out of me. I ended up with over 100,000 words, and now I've cut it way down. Now it's like just right at 45,000 words.
Oh, wow.
Well, part of that is when it's pouring out of you, you're pouring out all kinds of other things. And some of it was healing, some of it was regurgitation, and editing is a good thing. And during the course of me writing the book, I realized that is the next step in my journey. And I got certified as a life coach, and I know my purpose in my next step in the course of life is to help other people, specifically women, overcome fear and limiting beliefs.
Right. So what advice do you have somebody who's been through similar trauma as you, as a child or as an adult? What are some of the resources that you have for them, advice that you would give them if somebody were to come to you now and just say, this happened and I can't push past it like you easily were able to? Well, not easily. I'm just assuming. I'm just putting words in your mouth. I know it wasn't easy, but just, like maybe they feel like it was a lot less difficult for you to push through than for them.
There's a couple things. One of the first things that needs to happen is that people need to set personal boundaries. And the issue with setting personal boundaries is, number one, is if you are victimized and you have had a traumatic childhood or any trauma in your life, you don't feel worthy enough of self-love to set personal boundaries. You allow people to, do things and say things and take advantage of you because you don't feel you're worthy enough to stand up and say, no, no, we're not going to do that. So learning to set personal boundaries is part of building a self-care plan to take care of yourself. So that was one of the hardest things for me to do, because I was raised in a time period where you honor your mother and your father. And when my mother would call, I would have to take answer the phone and I have to talk to her because I need to honor her. What I didn't realize is honoring her doesn't mean I'm supposed to hurt myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the personal boundary I put in place was, Mom, I'll talk to you when you call if you're not drunk. If you're drunk, I'm going to say, Mom, you're drunk. I'm not talking to you. And I hang up the phone.
Wow.
That was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, because the part of me that's saying, honor thy mother, father, honor thy mother and father, is playing in the background. And, I'm trying to do that. And at the same time say, you know what, you can't hurt me anymore. This is unacceptable behavior.
Wow.
So setting boundaries would be one of those things. And that can start off with something easy. You can just say, no, I'm not going to answer the phone. Just because the phone's ringing doesn't mean you have to answer it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If somebody texts you something nasty, you don't have to respond.
Yeah.
That's setting those boundaries.
Right.
The second thing that really ultimately changed everything in how I perceive things was getting quiet. We don't get quiet anymore. And when you are traumatized, the tapes that play in your head, the egoic voice that just is endless, gabbing and gabbing and gabbing, and putting all kinds of negativity into your thought patterns needs to stop. And the only way to stop it is to try to find a way to get quiet. Because when you actually get quiet, two things happen. Number one, you actually hear your soul's whispers.
Oh, wow.
And that is when you get that gut reaction that people ignore. Never ignore your gut reaction. That is spirit. That is your soul manifesting through a physical process.
Okay.
So don't pay attention to your gut instinct.
Yeah.
But when you get quiet, and it can be really hard. It took me a long time to learn to do that. So I tried to learn how to meditate starting in 2012 and was unsuccessful. When Deepak Chopra and Oprah Winfrey did the 21-day meditations, I've done every single one since they started in 2013. Never missed one.
Okay. Wow.
And in 2015, I started taking yoga.
Yeah.
And 6 months into yoga, I had a realization that during Shavasana, that's corpse pose at the end of yoga where you're just kind of laying, I realized there were no thoughts going through my head.
Oh, wow.
And for me, I was dumbfounded. I thought it was a fluke. And so I continued going to yoga class specifically for that particular silence. And now I can do it anywhere. But it took me lots of time to get to that place where I could quiet myself.
Yeah.
And when you are able to quiet the egoic mind and just be, your soul will whisper to you. So when they talk about that still small voice, that's your gut. That's your soul whispering. Your soul is not something that is overpowering. That's the ego. The ego is overpowering. The ego is what's screaming in your head. The soul whispers. You have to get quiet to hear it. And what a lot of people have issues with when concerning the ego is they don't understand the purpose of the ego. The ego is a fabulous thing for us. It is meant to protect us. That is its entire job, to protect us. So my ego had a lot of protecting to do. I went through a lot of trauma. I was horribly hurt and abandoned. It needed to protect me. So it would do things and trigger me into believing certain things. So for example, the 3 men that raped me were all Hispanic. So when I got to college and I started seeing Hispanic people in college, I had angst. I didn't like it. And when I got into the workforce, I worked with a lot of Hispanic men. And I finally realized that, when I'm walking down the street and I see a Hispanic man coming towards me, the ego says, watch out, there's a Hispanic man coming. And I can say to my ego, thank you for giving me the warning. I've had more positive relationships with Hispanic men than I've had negative.
Right.
So I can dismiss this alarm.
Yeah.
And as soon as you are able to do that, then you don't have, every time I see a Hispanic man, that doesn't happen anymore. I don't have that angst that I used to have because the ego knows I've had more positive experiences.
Wow. So I feel like I have to like take this and just like loop it on replay over and over and write all these notes down, because that was so powerful and so like just full of wisdom. Just
Thank
so
you.
full of wisdom. Thank you for that. That was incredible. And anybody who's watching this really needs to like put this on replay and just watch, even if it's just that little part over and over, because I think we need that constant reminder every single day.
Mhm.
And, you know, and I think a lot of people too, I have a friend who tried to get into meditation and she just keeps saying, you know, it's too still for me. It's too quiet for me. I can't sit still. And, you know, and I keep saying, well, that's the whole purpose. Like, this is why it's good for you. But in her mind, it's just like, she just like thinks that she can't sit still, but I feel it's because she hasn't come to terms with finding that silence in there. And I don't even know if I have truly, but I've had closer moments doing yoga as opposed to, you know, everything else that I'm doing. But wow, that's incredible. Thank you.
You're welcome. One of the things that people can do is try doing it after they've exercised.
Uh-huh.
Because when you're tired,
Right.
the ego gets a little quieter.
Okay.
So, and that's what I think really what was happening was during an hour's worth of Shavasana yoga, where you're moving and everything, and you're laying down for that 10 minutes of Shavasana.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your brain is, you know, you've been doing all the poses, you know,
Yeah.
you've been paying attention to all of that. So
Yeah.
your brain now is also tired.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
ego is a little quieter, and
Okay.
that's how I would think I was able to overcome that.
Okay. Okay. Now, Terri, do you think that being Native American and being raised with those types of teachings that are in the culture has helped in any way as well?
I was not raised with any of that.
Okay.
Okay. So my mother, you would have thought somebody who had all that ripped away from her would have tried to teach that to her girls. She didn't.
Okay.
So I ended up finding out things all on my own. I
Yeah.
explored all that myself. And that's where in my book title is Raven Transcending Fear. And that's where Raven comes from. It's the clan that my mother belonged to, Raven clan.
Okay.
And I really grabbed a hold of it because in mythology, especially the Tlinglet Athabascan mythology, the raven is the thing that transforms the world.
Okay.
It's about rebirth and transcending those things that is of this world. And in the Bible, it's talks about manifestation and being taken care of. There's Greek mythology. There's it's all across. And normally people think the raven is a negative symbol, but you know, Noah sent out the raven first, not the dove. Sent out the raven first, and the raven didn't come back because the raven settled. The raven will go. They will figure out a way because you know they're really intelligent. They use tools. You can train them, and there's all kinds of fabulous YouTube videos about ravens.
I've seen some of them, and they're quite incredible. So thank you for sharing that as well. And I think it's very fascinating that you've had to learn this on your own and through research and everything. Have you ever been able to connect with the tribe and get with them to learn more at a deeper level there physically?
I have been once, and that was the last time I saw my mother. She had gone back to Fort Yukon, which is a little 8 miles inside the Arctic Circle. She had gone back 40 years after she had been given up for adoption.
Oh, wow.
So she hadn't seen anybody in those 40 years. And so we went, she and myself, and at the time her current husband, and a cousin who had been given up for adoption by his mother, and he wanted to go home. He wanted to meet the family, and my mother was taking him. So we went, and sustenance living is still sustenance living. I mean, they have water and electricity in the homes and everything, but you can only get there by flying in the wintertime, and in the summertime you can come by boat.
Oh, wow. But
you can't get there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's completely like 8 miles inside the Arctic Circle tells you something. It's complete tundra. And they still fish and they still hunt and they do all that for their sense. Yes, they have a school and they can buy chicken. You can buy chicken. It's very expensive chicken.
Oh my goodness.
Because everything has to be flown in.
Yeah. Oh.
Everything has to be flown in. So I do have family there, and I've stayed in touch with some of them over the years.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing. So my husband's journey in doing some of the DNA testing and everything found out that there was more Native American in him than he ever imagined.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's from the Southwest. He's from New Mexico. His family has been in New Mexico for centuries. And so we've always just assumed that the family came from Spain many centuries ago. And now we're finding out more. And so when we saw what my husband's DNA results came back as, we dug a little deeper. We went back to his parents and then found out they have a significant amount of Native American in them. And then we went back to their parents, who we have one surviving grandmother on one side, and then we do have a surviving aunt on the other side that we still need to see if we can do her testing just to see exactly how much more. But now that everything's unraveling, the family's like, oh yeah, well, you know, great grandma or grandma was born, you know, they had their wedding in Pueblo, and they're mentioning these things, and we're so eager and anxious to get out there and learn more, but making these phone calls during COVID is just not happening.
Yeah.
Nobody's at the reservation, nobody's picking up phone calls, and he's tried a couple of times, but we're very just intrigued to learn more about his past and where his ancestors came from. So that's really fascinating.
I think it's the DNA stuff that we can find out now is absolutely incredible. Yeah. And I think really and truly what we find out is that we're all mutts.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that there is no, you are not just African American, you are just Native American, you are a mutt. Everybody has a little bit of everything in them. Exactly.
It's pretty astonishing, all the little percentages. My husband has lots of different categories under his, whereas mine is pretty pure. not pure. I'm still a mutt, but it's pretty pure to the Asian regions. It used to be bigger, and then it keeps narrowing down more and more, but definitely very interesting stuff. So, all right. So then let's say you mentioned a little bit about your book, but I definitely want to get into it more with just how you use your pain for purpose and how you sat down and started writing those, 100,000 words and putting pen to paper. And so the message that you're relaying, and congratulations, you mentioned before we started recording that it's now on Kindle as well. And so congratulations, that's a huge accomplishment. So very excited for you, but just let's talk about that a little bit more.
Well, the book came about because I just felt that I needed to write the story. Yeah. And when I started writing, it poured out of me. I really felt like I didn't struggle to write it. The struggle came with editing, but the actual pouring out and typing away, and I could sit down and type for hours and had no clue that 6 hours went by. I didn't get hungry. I didn't have to go to the bathroom, none of that. It just poured out of me. So I know that it was divinely inspired for me to write the book. The process afterwards, which caused me to turn the business, because what ended up happening was you don't realize when you write a book that there's a whole industry out there about book publishing. And the one thing that they tell you over and over and over again in all the different places I had gone to find information was, you must have an author platform. So I created a website, terrikozlowski.com. And on January 1st of 2019, I started blogging. Every week, a new blog has gone up since January 1st of 2019. And as things grew, my son made a comment last year that I needed to have a podcast. Mom, you need a podcast. And I said, why? He said, because you'll reach a different audience than you do with your blog. I said, okay. So I took a podcast course and launched my podcast in August of 2020. This week I recorded my 29th episode. So that has been going. It's soulsolutionspodcast.com is where you can find it. It's on all the platforms, and I'm having a good time with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations. So much success to you. And
thank you.
So when I was snooping around on your social media, I came across your blog, and I said the same thing. So I love that you're consistent and it's once a week, because I went back pretty far, because I feel like a lot of times when I'm reading any of my guests' blogs, the farther I go back, the first couple of blogs are the ones where I'm really getting the good stuff, right? Like the things that they were trying to get off their chest all along. And so I went pretty far back. I went back 13 pages on your blog, and I found it says, you wrote, sometimes we are asked to stretch ourselves a little bit and go outside of our comfort zone. So of course that attracted me right away. And then it continues to say, when that occurs, what do we do? Do we decline, or do we show our bravery, or do something new? And then if we decline, do we choose to lose out on a great opportunity? Or if we choose to spread our wings, we have the opportunity to soar with the eagles. And I thought that was just so beautifully written and just pretty amazing. So tell me what inspired this particular blog. It was like your second one, so you probably may not remember too much about it, but you get the gist of where that message was going with.
The second blog was about staying in your comfort zone, that you can't grow if you stay in your comfort zone. And most people are very comfortable in their comfort zone. One of the things I talk about in the book is what I call the thorny blanket. And during any type of healing, especially healing from trauma, there is a part of you that has taken on defense mechanisms. And I had great defense mechanisms. The ego is fabulous at putting up defenses for you. But as you age and as you get older and as you form different types of relationships, those defense mechanisms end up harming you. They end up hurting you, because when you're keeping everybody away and now you're letting people in, you're, what's causing the change? Where are you going with that? So the thorny blanket is what I call it. And when you start healing, you take off the thorny blanket a little bit. And what you find out is that you have wounds and oozings and scabs, and that hurts. Healing hurts.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that. So they have this new pain and they don't like it. Yeah. So they put the thorny blanket back on because that pain is familiar. You know what that feels like.
Oh, wow.
So part of the discomfort and moving out of your comfort zone is taking off the thorny blanket and understanding that any growth is going to be a little uncomfortable. And that's okay. Yeah. That's okay. When we are a little uncomfortable, certain things happen. Number one, we perk up. We pay more attention when things are getting a little uncomfortable. And when we do that, we perceive things differently.
Yeah.
And my biggest goal for anybody that I ever talk to is that they see something differently in the way I presented it. So whether or not they've had their own trauma, and I can help them see a different perspective instead of being a victim, be a survivor, and how to choose that, whether or not they are playing the blame game, and tell them that if you decide to take responsibility from this day forward, release yourself from the past. You can release yourself from the depression and live a happy life, because happiness happens in the present moment. And if you're living in the past or worried about the future, you're not present.
Exactly.
Which means you can't be happy.
Yeah, yeah. So Terri, why do you think fear is a learned behavior?
Because if you look at small children, they are fearless. So remember your child when they were learning to walk? They fell down all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes they got hurt and they cried, but for the most time, if you didn't react, they would just get back up and keep going. So they didn't have fear of falling until we went,
Yep.
And now we scared them. Now we scared them. Now they're a crowd of fear. And we domesticate children into being part of society. Yeah. Society domesticates us. Our peer pressure domesticates us into behaving and becoming something that other people want us to be. So we arrive on the planet and spend the first 8 to 10 years of our life being authentically who we are. We go through as we go through the domestication process, we still try to fight back and say, no, I want to be a painter. I don't want to be a musician. We fight all that.
Yeah.
We continue, though, through peer pressure, through high school and college, where we're conforming and becoming what other people want us to be, what we think will make us fit in, and we lose our uniqueness. Hell we are, because we became whatever everybody else wanted, and we don't really like ourselves.
Yeah.
And then finally in our 30s, 40s, 50s, we have an aha moment and we become authentic again.
Right.
So fear was taught to us when we were children. And then we have to work ourselves out of understanding that fear is not something to actually live with. We don't live in fear. We respond with fear.
Mm-hmm.
So if we choose to respond from a place of love, receive back will be more loving. If
Mm-hmm.
we react out of a place of fear,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get negativity thrown back at you.
Yeah.
So it's learning to understand that a fearful response is a reaction. That's that when
Mm-hmm.
somebody screams at you, you scream back. Why are you upset? And do it calmly.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do it calmly, you change their vibrational level. You change their ability to continue to yell and scream, participate in the drama.
Mm-hmm.
It loses its power.
Oh, wow. Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard that before where it's, if somebody comes at you with aggression, like whether it was in relationships, romantic relationships or work relationships, the best thing for you to do in response is to not match their level of aggression and just move forward with a very as mellow as you can be, just to try to bring them back down to your level. So that's great advice. Thank you. So how do we remember who we were meant to be? Sometimes we lose ourselves and we forget what we were meant to be, whether it's our prescribed path or a path that we chose for ourselves and a goal that we set for ourselves. How do we stay in contact, in touch with it, and in tune with ourselves?
The way to stay in touch with our authentic selves goes back to getting quiet.
Yeah.
Getting grounded.
Okay.
Doing that every day.
Yeah.
To have a routine. It's the first hour of every morning. I read a devotional. I journal 3 pages. I write I am statements.
Mm-hmm.
I do all these things every morning so that I stay grounded.
You there?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
You cut out for a little bit there. So, but I think we got the gist of it.
Okay.
Definitely. So Terri, if I gave you a billboard, what would it say?
Raven Transcending Fear.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it would say. That has, I came up with the title of the book before I ever wrote a single word of the book.
Okay.
Because actually I wrote a poem called Raven Transcending Fear.
Mm-hmm.
And the first couple lines of every chapter of the book have lines of the poem in it.
Okay.
And it is my transformational story from coming to the world, being fearless and finding and discovering fear and dwelling in fear and then transcending the fear. So it's in the book, the poem.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Definitely have to check that out as soon as I get off this call with you, because I can.
You can.
Love it. So sometimes we don't know what we don't know. Is there something that I should have addressed or asked you that you would like to speak of?
I think that we had touched base a little bit about the comfort,
Mm-hmm.
and your podcast, Comfort Kills, is talking about making sure that you move out of your comfort zone.
Right.
And a lot of people, when they are in the trauma and healing process, don't know what comfort is. They're always in discomfort. And that's part of the uniqueness of dealing with trauma, is that there's always more growth. There's always the next step. And despite the fact that everything bad that's happened to me happened over 40 years ago, there are still new things every day that I want to learn. There are still new goals I want to achieve. And the whole idea of growth and personal development is the reason we are here on the planet. Is for that internal growth. We're not here to make money. We're not here to raise families. We're here for our personal journey to remember who we authentically are and then live that from that place. And when we all decide that we're going to live authentically, when we all decide that we are going to respond from a place of love instead of reacting from a place of fear, we're going to find peace in the world, we're going to find love in the world, and we're going to realize that we're all the same.
There you go. And so, Terri, I feel like your coaching business is, half passion project as well. That you're really just wanting, I mean, you have a successful career. You just want to be there to support and coach others through similar situations or their own unique situations. So what is the ideal type of client for you? What are the types of people who come to you and say, Terri, I need help?
I've had men and women come to me who have had some sort of trauma, and they don't seem to know how to get past it. The other aspect of that is the only requirement I have to work with somebody is that they have to be willing to do the work.
Yeah.
All I'm going to do is give them different perspectives, make them think. That's all my job is to make somebody else think differently than they have in the past.
Yeah.
But they have to do the work. And a lot of times you end up with people who think that that coaching is similar to going to therapy, and that's not what it is. Therapy, they want you to sit and they want you to talk about your past. I'm not here to sit and talk and rehash your past. I'm here to say, what are you thinking today? Why are you thinking that today? And let's change how you're thinking today. I need to know a little bit about the past, but the past isn't really what's causing the issues today.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, if people would like to reach out to you, Terri, where can they find you? What's the best place?
TerriKozlowski.com. My website is the best place. You can also contact me on Transcending.Fear.com, which is the book, as well as SoulSolutionsPodcast.com.
All right. Well, thank you again, Terri, so much for coming out today and sharing your story with us and just sharing how resilient you are of a person and just what you're putting back out there to the world and to your community. Thank you so, so much. I am so blessed to have met you, and I think you're doing such an amazing job, and just keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you very much, Jasmine, for having me. I enjoyed our time together.
Thank you.